Actually, it's almost like a detective sort of putting together this happened here, this happened here, oh, and this happened here, and they all corroborate each other
Right.
in ways that couldn't possibly have been planned, sort of in some. So, okay, it's an interesting way of trying to show that the Book of Acts is historically valid, because if we're happy that this letter, the First Corinthians, was written by Paul about things that happened when he sent Timothy and so on, then it seems to align perfectly with the story that Luke tells in Acts of when he sent Timothy and all that kind of thing. What's your take on that way of trying to corroborate the Book of Acts, Richard?
Well, it doesn't help us figure out which things Luke has added or changed, right? So just the fact that he's using the letters of Paul as source material, he may have had some other source material, that doesn't help us determine which things are actually coming from authentic sources and which things are embellishments or changes or alterations. And we know for a fact that Luke is wantonly altering things. He definitely has the letters of Paul as source material, but he is wantonly contradicting them. And I'll give you examples. Paul himself tells us that he was unknown by face to anyone in Judea until years after his conversion. Acts has him already a famous person living in Judea from the beginning. Paul says he went to Arabia for years immediately after his conversion. Acts completely erases his mission to Arabia and has him immediately go to Damascus and then back to Judea. And then Paul says he was the one sent by Jesus to the Gentiles, and that he had to persuade Peter to accept his Torah-free gospel, and it took years to convince him. Acts has Peter instead receive the revelation from Jesus that preaches the Torah-free gospel, and Peter and Paul are on the same page about that before they even meet. And so there are many other aspects of direct contradiction between what Acts says of Paul and what Paul himself tells us, which really tells us we can't trust Acts, because Acts, whoever's writing it, is trying to write their own story. They're changing things that they don't like. They're getting rid of things they don't like. They're altering the chronology. And we have other examples of mistakes that are made. For example, Acts incorrectly asserts that the messianic pretender Theudas appeared before the census of 6 AD, when in fact his events, Theudas and his whole story, took place in the 40s AD, quite famously, which would have been directly contemporary with Paul, and thus Luke, if Luke was a companion of Paul. So a companion of Paul could not have made that mistake about Theudas, whereas we can explain this mistake if he was using source material not related to Christianity, if he was using the antiquities of the Jews by Josephus, for example.
Well, there's quite a few things to...
So when you look at all of that stuff, that means that we have a problem. We have Acts clearly not telling the truth a lot. And so even if you find examples of, oh, maybe it's got this part right, that doesn't help us with the other stuff.